Chapter 11, a study of reincarnation or rebirth. He asked his disciples, saying, Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, Some say thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremias or one of the prophets. St. Matthew 16:13-14. When the old teaching of reincarnation was revived in the Western world, it was necessary to bring to bear all the powers of logic to prove its reasonability and its ancient and worldwide acceptance. Today this truth has permeated all classes of society, filling the world's literature and furnishing the motif for many successful stage productions, thus providing that the public is eager for the subject. This itself is an evidence of rebirth, for what else can this widely renewed interest in the subject be but a reincarnation of an ancient worldwide belief? For detailed proof of its reasonability, we refer the student to other authorities. Like many others that are true and generally accepted, proof that would convince all is out of the question, for what is proof to one is not to another. For instance, a spiritualist might say that if he had lived before, something might be given him by discarnate entities about a former life that could be verified by historical records. This would be no proof at all, for it would be an easy matter for any discarnate entity capable of communicating to secure the information from any records accessible to the investigator. As far as absolute proof goes, each one must take this law as he takes many other laws upon its reasonability. If it fails in this or in its ability to afford a rational explanation for the many discrepancies of life which are otherwise unexplainable, he is at liberty to reject it. But for those who do accept it, we will make an effort to remove some of the misconceptions and clear up some of the vagaries which, like barnacles, have attached themselves to the truth. Intimately, or rather indissolubly, connected with karma is the law of rebirth, or of the reincarnation of the same spiritual individuality in a long, almost indeterminable series of personalities. The latter are like the various characters played by the same actor, with each of which the actor identifies himself and is identified by the public for a space of a few hours. The inner or real man, who personates these characters, knows the whole time that he is Hamlet only for the brief space of a few acts, which, however, on the plane of human illusion, represents the whole life of Hamlet. He knows also that he was, the night before, King Lear, the transformation in his turn of the Othello of a still earlier preceding night. And though the outer, visible character is supposed to be ignorant of the fact, and in actual life that ignorance is unfortunately but too real, nevertheless the permanent individuality is fully aware of it, and it is through the atrophy of the spiritual eye in the physical body that knowledge is unable to impress itself on the consciousness of the personality. When the physical body is left in the tomb, the soul is clothed in the astral body and lives for a time upon the astral plane in the exact environment for which its development fits it. A period of time is passed in digesting and assimilating the lessons of the past life in the reverse order of their acquirement and in realizing the inevitable trend of all its desires and actions while on earth. The progress made is in the growth and development of the seeds of good and evil sown during earth life. For this reason, unless reincarnation had been brought to one's attention upon earth, he would be very unlikely to know anything about it or come in contact with those who did, for there is nothing in his astral environment to suggest it any more than there was in his physical environment. After having passed through the various subdivisions of the astral world and passed on to higher states of consciousness, there comes a time in his evolution when, after a long period of rest, during which he has exhausted or experienced the spiritual bliss resulting from the realization of all his earthly ideals, he realizes his limitation and chooses once more to clothe himself in the flesh. He does this firstly from a comprehension of the great work of the redemption of humanity and the globe which he has gained upon the higher planes, and of the necessity of fitting himself, through further earthly experience, for his necessary part in that work. And secondly, because of a strong desire to help on the evolution of the race, which evolution can only be accomplished by the purified soul clothing itself in fleshly atoms that it may train and purify them. The soul realizes that its lack of experience limits its usefulness, and a deliberate choice is made once more to function through a physical body. Being one with God, the soul has the power of choosing its path and its environment, subject to the law of karma, the one desire being to quickly fulfill the cycle of necessity and return to the Father's heart. Therefore it chooses an environment, not as a personality would choose, for wealth, ease, or happiness, for it realizes that spiritual happiness must be born of earthly experience, must be the giving up of self for the upliftment of all. but an environment which will give it the best opportunity to gain the experience it lacks, the best environment that its karma will permit. It naturally incarnates among its old associates unless, as sometimes happen, there is some karma or needed lesson that takes it temporarily into a new set of association, a side issue. This clothing itself in flesh involves the training of a new instrument, brain and body, which is not correlated with the memory of the real self, and thus the why is forgotten, for otherwise the lessons would be no lessons at all. The experience of the soul might roughly be compared to a person away on a pleasure trip in a foreign country, where he suddenly realizes there is some task he has failed to perform ere leaving, or that there is some loved one who needs his help, and he returns to take up the duty, even though the task be sordid and repulsive, and the loved one unappreciative. There is no person, therefore, who can say that at the present time he is having his last incarnation, for only when the soul reaches the stage where it weighs itself in the balance and realizes that there still lacks something of Earth's experience to fit it to take its destined place in the grand plan. Only then can it be known whether or not the Earth urge will draw it back into incarnation. This urge is not always from karmic necessity, except during the earlier stages of evolution, for many souls return through pure love and compassion to help the world, even after they, as separated individuals, have gained all the necessary experience and wisdom. Therefore, it is foolish for pupils or disciples to talk about this being their last incarnation, for were they advanced in wisdom, they would know that their attitude proclaimed aloud that they were lacking in even ordinary discretion and common sense. We must also bear in mind that there are many more souls excarnate than incarnate. Many of them are waiting for the wave of civilization to rise to the special point that will permit them to fulfill their destiny in accord with karmic law. If the student will refer to what was said about the color rays in the chapter on evolution, it will be found to apply here. Since all souls belong to one of the 7 great rays, they must wait for incarnation until the ray and sub-ray to which they belong is in manifestation. Thus, if a soul started its special work during the manifestation of a certain sub-ray of the red ray, while under special conditions hinted at elsewhere, it might incarnate and work out side issues in other sub-rays. Yet the main work could not be continued until the same sub-ray was again manifesting. There is no regular set time during which souls remain excarnate. It depends upon many conditions and ranges all the way from almost immediate rebirth to 500 years, and in some cases far more. There is almost a greater diversity in times and seasons for rebirth as is found in the affairs of men. When it is taught that a soul incarnates sometimes in one sex and sometimes in another, or in each sex for 7 incarnations alternately, only a very small fragment of a great truth was hinted at. This partial truth, as time passed, has developed some ridiculous and irrelevant conceptions. Again, it is asserted by many that sex does not inhere in the soul, but the fact is that sex inheres in every manifestation of consciousness, although on the higher planes, sex manifests in quite a different way from that we know as sex in the physical plane. While the great mystery of sex in its fullness is as sacredly guarded today as it has ever been, still, as this is the beginning of a new cycle or the reincarnation of a period of the manifestation of this great mystery, it becomes the duty of those masters and teachers connected with this special line of work to again give to the world a suggestion of the inner truth connected with sex. But alas, the time is not yet ripe to entirely tear aside the veil and reveal the mysteries of the subject, although an effort is being made from the higher side of life to open the understanding of a few who can realize the divine possibilities of sex, that they may penetrate behind the veil. It is not the rule for a soul to change its sex when incarnating, but it is rather the exception. Since the separation of the sexes during the third race, the positive and negative rays always retain their characteristics and tend to incarnate in a body corresponding to their polarity. The exception occurs principally for 2 reasons. The first one, which alas at this period is only too common, is that if a soul gaining experience either through a male or a female body fails to appreciate the lessons of the opposite sex, if it despises the other and either cruelly treats it or holds itself superior to it, such a soul at its next incarnation may find itself in a physical body of the despised sex, for this would be the only way that such a soul could learn the lessons of that sex and reap the karma it had created. However, the sex of the incarnating soul would not be changed. It would always be a male soul in a female body, or vice versa. The world has no trouble in recognizing this, for such misfitted souls are frequent in every community, and there is no difficulty in noting the discrepancy between the sex of the incarnated entity and its body. Every male contains the potentiality of the female, and every female that of the male. And while we would not speak of this duality as sex upon the spiritual plane, as we use the term sex on the physical plane, still, if the student will remember what was said in the chapter on karma in regard to each soul being part of the great or heavenly man, and having a special work to do and a special place in which to fulfill its destiny, comparing it to the bodies we have done, it will be seen that some organs or souls must fulfill the function of the positive expression, masculinity, while others express the negative, femininity. Any other conditions would be unthinkable, for while we know that all expressions of life, from molecule to God, are perfect epitomes of the cosmos and contain the two opposite poles, positive and negative, within each, yet in the aggregation of either atoms, organs, or soul, each must function with either the positive or negative expression predominating. It is just as though you took a horseshoe magnet and cut it into pieces. Each piece would be a perfect magnet with positive and negative poles, and if you could separate it into atoms, each atom would have its positive and negative poles. But when you put the atoms together to form a grand magnet, each would take its place on either the positive or negative side and express either attraction or repulsion. To carry this simile further, by reversing the current through the magnet, it would be easy to make that which was the positive pole become the negative and vice versa. This is what takes place when a masculine entity clothes itself with a feminine body. As to man evolving into an androgynous being in which both sexes manifest co-equally, as long as mankind is manifesting in separated sexes, it is a waste of time and energy to try to imagine such an existence. For until you have learned all the lessons possible in separated bodies, you can have no realization of what such a manifestation will be like. And you will never learn those lessons as long as you despise any function and refuse to master it. The two sexes can never blend into one until each has reached a perfect expression of his or her sex, and they have learned to work together in perfect harmony while separated. The lesson is not for one sex to avoid or ignore the other, but to learn how the twain may become one in all things, in heart, mind, and body, thus fulfilling the great law of sex. The second and rare cause for the change of sex is that a soul may have reached a degree of mastery, yet owing to the world karma and to the restrictions of conventionality, such a soul may never have fully grasped or understood the opposite sex. For instance, a soul expressing the masculine principle might be deeply desirous of entering into the experience of the innermost depths of the opposite soul expression, so as to see its temptations, feel its oppression, learn its limitation, and thus be ready to take up special work in the coming age, whose keynote is the equalization of the sexes and the liberation and restoration of woman to her proper place. Therefore, a great teacher, in preparing to take the place of a leader in such an age, might naturally desire to be clothed for one life period with a female outer covering. But even in this case, it would be evident to all thinkers that the sex of the entity differed from that of the body. Such a great teacher, moreover, might use that period, which would be her last earth experience, in entering into all phases of life. She might use the power possessed by all such teachers to merge the apparent personality into various other personalities. Thus, for a time, she might have to become one with and apparently manifest the qualities of a depraved sister, a swearing, roistering swashbuckler, a pirate, a learned scholar, or any other phase of humanity. She would thus, in a measure, be gaining the experience of humanity in the only way that would make the experience her very own, knowing all the temptations and also the inner germ of love and hope that even the most degraded hides somewhere within. Such a great teacher might be compared to an author who, in gathering data for a coming work, lives for a time in each class of society. But in the case of the great teacher, the power would be hers to absolutely become, for a time, the personality she desired to study. Thus, when her great work began, she would know just how to deal with all types of brothers and sisters, and from the higher planes be ready to direct the reaping of the golden grain sprung from the seeds of divine truth planted during her last earthly incarnation. Such a complex personality was she who planted the seed of the wisdom religion in the Western world, and she is still directing its garnering from the higher planes.